The man I welcomed into my home crossed a line I never thought he would, while my own husband looked the other way. My name is Linda, and I was 41 when all of this began. If you had asked me 2 years ago, I would have told you I was living a simple, content life. Not perfect, of course. What marriage is. But Mark and I had a rhythm. A quiet understanding. After 15 years together, we knew each other's silences, as well as we knew each other's laughter. I was working part-time at a small publishing company, while Mark worked full-time in IT. We lived in a cozy house just outside of Denver, nothing fancy, but it was home. I wasn't the kind of woman who expected fireworks every day. Stability mattered more to me. A clean kitchen, a warm bed, and someone who kissed my forehead before heading to work. That was enough. Until Adam moved in. Mark's old college friend. I had heard stories about him over the years, some wild, some hilarious, most involving too much beer and questionable decisions. But I never met him in person. Then, one weekend, out of nowhere, Mark told me Adam had accepted a new job in our city and needed a place to stay while getting on his feet. "It'll only be for a couple weeks," Mark said with a smile. "You'll love him. He's a good guy." I wanted to protest. I really did. Something about it didn't sit right. But I swallowed the hesitation and nodded. Of course. A couple weeks is no problem. The first few days were fine. Adam was friendly, maybe a little too talkative. He offered to help with the dishes, bought groceries unprompted, even complimented my cooking. But something about the way he looked at me felt off. Too long, too intense. You know that feeling when someone's eyes linger a second too long, and you can't quite put your finger on why it bothers you? I told myself I was being paranoid. One evening, Mark was working late. I came home from the grocery store to find Adam in the living room, lounging in Mark's seat with a glass of wine. He smiled at me slowly, like he knew something I didn't. I laughed awkwardly and walked to the kitchen. "You always wear your hair like that?" he asked. I paused. "Like what?" "Pulled back like that. Shows off your neck." I forced a smile and muttered something about the heat. Then I disappeared upstairs, locking the door behind me for the first time since we moved into that house. Still, I said nothing to Mark. Not yet. I didn't want to sound dramatic. Adam had just moved here. Maybe he was awkward. Maybe I was misinterpreting things. Women are told that all the time, right? That we overreact. That we read into things. But deep down, I already knew something was wrong. And it was only going to get worse. I tried to shake it off. I truly did. For the next few days, I buried myself in work, house chores, anything to avoid lingering too long in the same room as Adam. But that wasn't easy. He was always around. On the couch when I came down for coffee. In the kitchen when I got home from work. Watching me not overtly, just enough to make my skin crawl. One night, I was cleaning up after dinner when he came up behind me. I hadn't heard him. His voice was low, too close. "Your husband's lucky. You're wasted on him." I froze. I didn't even turn around. I just kept scrubbing the plate in my hand like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. When I finally managed to speak, my voice was flat. "That's not appropriate, Adam." He chuckled, unbothered. "Relax. It's just a compliment." I didn't sleep well that night. The next morning, I sat across from Mark at the breakfast table, watching him scroll through his phone, sipping coffee, completely unaware of how uncomfortable I had become in my own home. I wanted to tell him. I opened my mouth twice, closed it both times. Because how do you explain that his best friend, the man he trusted, the one sleeping in our guest room, was slowly turning your house into a place you no longer felt safe in? Mark would think I was overreacting. Or worse, jealous, imagining things. Women are taught to doubt themselves, aren't we? To question our instincts instead of trusting them. I had done it before, in other moments, other situations. But this time, the unease was too consistent, too loud to ignore. A week later, it got worse. Mark had gone on an overnight work trip. I stayed late at the office just to avoid being home alone with Adam. But eventually I had to go back. It was nearly 9 p.m. when I walked through the front door. The lights were dimmed. The living room was empty, but I could hear the faint sound of jazz playing from the stereo. Adam? I called out, uneasy. He appeared in the hallway, shirt unbuttoned, drink in hand. There you are. I was starting to think you were avoiding me. I didn't answer. I just walked past him and went straight upstairs, locking the bedroom door behind me. I texted Mark. Can we talk tomorrow? Something's off. He replied with a thumbs up emoji. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening for any sound, every creak in the floorboards. I had never felt so on edge in my own home. And the worst part? I still hadn't told anyone. And I want to ask you, have you ever been made to feel unsafe, but when you told someone, they brushed it off? Or worse, didn't believe you? What did you do? Because I was starting to wonder if I'd ever feel at peace again inside those walls. The next day, I sat across from Mark at the kitchen table, my coffee untouched. I had barely slept. My nerves were fried, my stomach in knots. I need to talk to you about Adam, I said, voice trembling despite my best efforts to stay calm. Mark looked up, surprised. What about him? I hesitated, took a breath. He's been making me uncomfortable. Saying things. Staring. Just crossing lines. Mark blinked. Crossing lines how? I told him. Not everything. I didn't know how to say it all without sounding hysterical, but enough. The way Adam hovered too close, the things he said. The night he waited for me to come home like that. Mark set down his mug, leaned back in his chair. Come on, Linda. He's my best friend. He's probably just being friendly and you're taking it the wrong way. You've been under a lot of stress lately. There it was. The dismissal. The invalidation. The one thing I feared most. I just stared at him. So you don't believe me? I didn't say that, he replied quickly, defensive now. I'm just saying, Adam wouldn't do that. He's not that kind of guy. But he was. I knew it in my bones. And in that moment, I realized something. If Mark couldn't even believe me about this, about something happening right under his nose, what else had he turned a blind eye to? I started noticing other things. Subtle things. How Mark had begun taking Adam's side in every disagreement. How Adam had become a constant presence in our lives, offering opinions on our relationship, even criticizing me openly when Mark was around. And Mark? He just let it happen. I began to feel like a stranger in my own home. One afternoon, I came home early from work. I stepped inside and immediately felt that tightness in my chest again. The house was quiet, but too quiet. I heard murmuring coming from the patio. I moved slowly toward the back door and looked through the glass. There they were, Mark and Adam, laughing, talking in hushed tones. And for a split second, Adam turned and looked directly at me. He smiled, that same smug smile. That was the moment I knew. He was getting in Mark's head, turning him against me, piece by piece. It wasn't just about inappropriate comments anymore. This was about control. It was about a man inserting himself where he didn't belong between us. Tell me, if someone outside your marriage started eroding the very foundation of trust you built, and your partner refused to see it, what would you do? Because I was starting to wonder if my husband had already chosen a side. And I was terrified it wasn't mine. The day everything truly shifted wasn't marked by screams or bruises. It was quieter than that. It was the silence between us that became deafening. David came home from work and slammed the door. Again. I barely flinched anymore. He tossed his coat over the chair, didn't look at me, and went straight to the fridge. That night, he barely said a word during dinner. Just sat there, chewing, scrolling through his phone, occasionally grunting at whatever video he was watching. I wasn't even worth pretending for anymore. After the dishes were done, I sat on the couch and stared at the muted television while he stayed in the bedroom. I could hear the faint buzz of his voice on the phone laughing. He never laughed around me anymore. I couldn't help but wonder, Was he laughing with someone else? The next morning, he asked me if I'd considered getting a part-time job. His exact words were, "You're home all day, Linda. Maybe you should start pulling your weight again." As if years of keeping our household running, supporting him through promotions, and sacrificing my career meant nothing now. I wanted to scream, "I've always pulled my weight. You just never saw it." But instead, I smiled weakly and said I'd think about it. I didn't want to admit it, but I felt small, diminished, like I was fading into the wallpaper of my own life. That's when I started writing in my old journal again, the one I hadn't touched since before we got married. Each page I filled reminded me of the woman I used to be. One night, I found myself standing in front of the mirror, staring at my own reflection for longer than I'd like to admit. The lines on my face weren't just from aging, they were from worry, from clenching my jaw, from holding back tears. I used to be vibrant, full of ideas and laughter and plans. Where had that woman gone? David didn't notice any of this. Or if he did, he didn't care. He stopped asking about my day. He stopped touching me. He stopped pretending. And I started waking up with a strange mixture of anxiety and clarity. What was I doing? I had given up so much for him. My job, my family's trust, my independence. And for what? To be invisible in my own home? To be treated like a burden? I remember one night, curled up on the couch with my journal on my lap, I wrote, "I've been surviving for so long, I forgot what it feels like to live." And that sentence shook me. I began researching online, not for divorce lawyers, not yet, but for women's shelters, for part-time opportunities, for therapy groups. Anything that could help me remember who I was before I became Mrs. David. Let me ask you something, and I hope you'll answer in the comments. Have you ever looked in the mirror and not recognized yourself anymore? Have you ever wondered if the life you built was really yours, or just the one someone else wanted you to live? Because that's exactly where I was. And I knew I couldn't stay there much longer. There comes a moment in every woman's life when the quiet voice inside becomes too loud to ignore. Mine came one rainy Tuesday afternoon. David had left early for work. I was in the kitchen, folding laundry, when I got a call from my sister, Amanda, the first in nearly 2 years. I froze when I saw her name on the screen. My hands trembled. Part of me wanted to ignore it. But something stronger, something braver, made me answer. "Linda," she said, voice soft, "I know I'm the last person you want to hear from. But I miss you." I didn't speak right away. Tears welled in my eyes. Her voice was like a lifeline thrown across a stormy sea. "I miss you too," I whispered. She didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't mention David or the fight that tore us apart. Instead, she asked if I was okay. And, for the first time in a long while, I told someone the truth. "No," I said. "I'm not okay." We talked for over an hour. I told her everything, how David had changed, how I had changed, how I felt like a ghost of myself. Amanda didn't judge. She just listened, and that alone felt like a miracle. After that call, something shifted inside me. I went upstairs and opened the closet, pulling out a box I hadn't touched in years. Inside were old photos of me before I married David. Me with friends. Me on stage, speaking at a women's conference. Me smiling, confident, full of purpose. That woman felt like a stranger, but also like someone I wanted desperately to find again. Over the next few days, I started doing little things. I applied for a part-time position at the local library. I signed up for a free support group for women. I even went for a walk in the park without telling David, and for once, I didn't feel guilty for taking space for myself. But of course, David noticed. And he didn't like it. One evening, I came home and found him waiting in the kitchen, arms crossed, jaw tight. "Where have you been?" he asked, voice low but hard. "I was at a support group," I replied calmly. He scoffed. "Support group? For what? Feeling sorry for yourself?" "No," I said, meeting his gaze. "For remembering who I am." His face turned red. He muttered something under his breath and stormed out. He didn't speak to me the rest of the night. But I didn't shrink this time. I didn't cry. I sat at the kitchen table and wrote in my journal, "I'm not scared of his silence anymore. It's just noise that reminds me of how far I've come." The next day, I got a call back from the library. They wanted me to come in for an interview. When I told David, he said, "You won't have time to cook or clean if you're working." "I'll make time," I replied. "For both, and for myself." That was the first time I saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Maybe he realized the control he'd held was slipping. Let me ask you something. Have you ever done one small, brave thing that changed everything? Something so small no one else noticed, but you felt it in your soul? That's what this was for me. It wasn't just an interview. It was a declaration. I was coming back to life, one step at a time. David didn't yell. That would have been too obvious. He chipped away at me with silence, sarcasm, and carefully measured criticisms. After I got the part-time job at the library, it only got worse. "You seem to enjoy playing independent woman," he muttered one evening as I made myself dinner. He hadn't eaten what I cooked the night before, said it was too bland, and tossed it in the trash. I didn't respond. I didn't have the energy to defend myself anymore. Instead, I focused on the small victories. I had a job. I had regained some financial control. I was slowly rebuilding the woman I used to be. But one night, the mask finally slipped. I came home from work and found my journal, my private thoughts, torn and crumpled in the trash. "You shouldn't leave things like that lying around," he said without looking up from the couch. "You read it." My voice was barely more than a whisper. "I wanted to know what you've been writing about me." My stomach twisted. That journal was the one safe place I had. It held my truths, my pain, my healing, and he had violated it. "Those were my thoughts, David. My personal space." He shrugged. "When you live in my house, there's no such thing as personal space." Something inside me cracked. I wasn't afraid in the way I had been before. I was angry. "No, David. This is our house. And I'm not a prisoner in it." He stood up fast, knocking over a chair. "You think you're brave now? Because you work 10 hours a week shelving books." "No," I said, standing tall. "I think I'm brave because I'm still here." "I haven't let you destroy me." He didn't reply, just clenched his fists and walked out of the room. That night, I stayed with Amanda. I hadn't slept in someone else's house in years, but the moment I walked into her warm, welcoming kitchen, I felt something I hadn't felt in so long. Safe. Amanda poured me tea, sat me down, and said, "You're stronger than you think. And you don't have to do this alone." She helped me look up resources, women's shelters, legal aid, therapy. For the first time, I saw a path forward. It was messy and uncertain, but it was mine. The next day, I went back to the house and started quietly packing the things that mattered most: my documents, clothes, a few keepsakes. I didn't tell David. Not yet. I didn't need another confrontation. I needed space. A plan. But he must have sensed something. He started being nice again. Flowers. Dinner. Compliments. It was almost worse than the cruelty. "Don't go," he said one night, voice low and tender. "We can fix this. I need you." I looked at him, really looked at him. And for the first time, I saw a man who didn't love me. He needed me to stay small so he could feel big. Let me ask you, have you ever realized that someone's kindness wasn't love, but control dressed up in softer words? Did you stay or did you walk away? That question haunted me. But I already knew the answer. And I was almost ready to act on it. The morning I left, the sky was clear, no ominous clouds, no dramatic thunder. Just quiet sun over the horizon, like it was gently nodding at me, saying, "It's time." I woke early, before David. I moved silently, like I had practiced in my mind 100 times. My bag was already packed. My important documents were tucked into the side pocket. I wasn't taking everything, just enough to start. Amanda was waiting in her car down the street. I had texted her just a simple word, "Ready." As I closed the front door behind me, I felt something unexpected. Peace. Not guilt. Not fear. Just a quiet knowing that this wasn't an escape. It was a return. A return to myself. Amanda hugged me tight when I got in. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I believed it. We drove to a women's shelter she had found for me. It was clean, welcoming, full of women with tired eyes but open hearts. They didn't ask many questions. Just offered a room, a warm meal, and a safe place to breathe. In that small room, with chipped paint and floral curtains, I cried. Not because I was broken, but because I was finally whole enough to feel everything. The following weeks were hard. I had to adjust to a new routine, new people, unfamiliar walls. But each day, I stood a little taller. I started therapy, something I'd avoided for years. In those quiet sessions, I peeled back layers I had buried under David's words. I stayed because I thought no one else would love me, I admitted one day. My voice cracked, but I didn't look away. And now, my therapist asked. Now I think. I don't need someone else to love me to be okay. I need me to love me. And I did. Slowly, patiently. I applied for a full-time library job in a nearby town. The director called and offered me an interview. I took the bus, wore my best clothes, hands shaking, heart pounding. But I got the job. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. My effort. My win. With the help of a legal aid lawyer, I filed a restraining order. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was prepared. I learned about my rights. About how financial and emotional abuse aren't less than physical abuse. They're just quieter prisons. Amanda helped me find a tiny apartment. The kind with thin walls and cheap flooring, but it had a lock I controlled and windows that let in sunlight. I decorated it with second-hand furniture and potted plants. I bought myself a new mug that said, "Rise Again." Every morning, I drank my coffee from it and reminded myself that leaving wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning. Ladies, let me ask you something from my heart. Have you ever stayed in a life that hurt just because you were too scared to find out what freedom felt like? What would you do if you finally tasted it and it felt like breathing again? That's what it was for me. Freedom didn't come with fanfare. It came with small moments. A quiet room, a bus ticket, a cup of coffee in a space I could finally call mine. I wasn't done healing, but I was no longer hiding. I was building something new. Sometimes, when I'm sitting by my small window with a cup of tea in hand, I find myself thinking back, not with bitterness, but with awe. Not at what David did, but at what I did. I left. I didn't just leave a man. I left fear. I left silence. I left the version of myself that had forgotten she mattered. And somehow I found her again. The woman who used to laugh freely. Who used to dream about having her own little space. Who loved the smell of old books and the sound of rain. She had been buried under years of cruel words, dismissed ideas, and slowly drained confidence. But she had never left me. She was just waiting for me to choose her again. And I did. I rebuilt my life, not in grand, sweeping gestures, but in quiet, steady steps. I learned how to manage my money again. I got used to eating alone and eventually started enjoying it. I painted my walls in soft yellows and greens because I wanted my world to feel like spring again. And slowly, it did. David tried to reach out once. Just a short, meaningless text, "Hope you're okay." I didn't respond. Because I was more than okay. I was free. And you know what still amazes me? It wasn't some dramatic turning point. It was me sitting in silence one night, asking myself, is this the life I want to die in? And realizing it wasn't. We often wait for a sign. For someone to save us. For the pain to get worse before we believe we're allowed to walk away. But the truth is, you don't need anyone's permission to choose yourself. So now, every morning, I stand in front of the mirror, brush my hair, and remind myself of this simple truth. I am not what was done to me. I am what I chose to become afterward. And I chose strength. To any woman listening right now who feels like her voice has been drowned out, who's been made to feel small or crazy or too much, please hear this. You are not alone. And you are not powerless. We are so much stronger than we're told. We are not made to stay quiet. We are made to rise. If my story touched something in you, if you've ever felt trapped but didn't know how to take the first step, just know you already have. Because you're here. You're listening. And you're thinking. That's how it begins. And if you want to hear more stories of women like me, women who have walked through fire but refused to let it consume them, then I invite you to subscribe to this channel. We rise together. Oh, and one last thing. If you want more women like us to find these stories of resilience, of rediscovery, of rising, then please don't forget to like this video. Your one click might be the light someone else needs.